of course I picked them, so why wouldn't I like them?
That's right.
There you go. Mm-hmm. So good
stuff.
choices.
Yeah, thanks.
Classics.
Indeed.
So. And that takes us to the portion of the show in which we're going to do some reviews, which I think we're all excited about. Probably no one more excited, though, than Matt this week, who's going to be leading us off.
That's
Matt,
right.
you know what? I'm just going to allow you right now to just go right into the numbers and take it away.
What's the deal with Marillion?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to find out, Josh. So we are covering Marillion with their album Misplaced Childhood. And in the opening montage, you heard a clip from Kaylee. And now you're going to hear a clip from Heart of Lothian.
These hearts of Lothian.
Really
right,
call it Lothian in the song, though. I couldn't.
Lothian.
It's like an R almost. That's
Lothian. Yeah, I don't know.
Is it
got
fair
a very
to say?
dramatic voice. Yeah.
Is it fair to say when you get a song called Heart of Lothian, you kind of know what you're going to get before you even hear the song? Or?
I think that's pretty fair. Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
So Misplaced Childhood comes in at number 91 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 10 in 1985, number 599 of all time. It is Marillion's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. And it did not make Rolling Stone's list, but they are ranked number 220 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So fairly highly regarded there. All right, so we'll do a little history of this, but this record was recorded from March through May of 1985, and it was released on June 17th, 1985. Happy birthday, Mom. It's their third studio album, and it's considered a seminal album in the neo-prog rock movement, which is a term actually I was not familiar with. So neo-prog is a genre of
Why
music.
did they call it post-prog? I guess it's not really.
I don't know. Maybe that's a different. That would be a good name for it too.
Yeah.
But and there is an excellent definition that I got off of Wikipedia about neo-prog. I'm not going to read that right now. I might save that for later because I have a feeling if I start reading that, it's going to just take all the descriptions that we might come up with off the dome. So I'll come with that later. But Marillion is kind of the preeminent neo-prog band of all time. They're kind of the main guys with that. So the album was produced by a guy named Chris Kimsey, who had also worked with multiple other artists, some of which we've covered, including Peter Frampton, the Rolling Stones, Jimmy Cliff, Killing Joke, Psychedelic Furs, Duran Duran, and Yes. So he's got an extensive catalog that he has worked with. So a little history of the band. It was formed in late 1978 by drummer Mick Pointer and bassist Doug Irvine, which came together after working in a band together called Electric Gypsy. And the band's name was originally called Cimmerillion, after the J.R.R. Tolkien novel. Surprise, surprise. But they changed it to just Marillion not too long afterwards. Some reports have suggested that they did this to avoid any copyright lawsuits that they might be confronted with. So
good call.
Yeah, probably. So it's one of those bands where, in the early years, there was a plethora of lineup changes. And I'm not going to go through all the names on those, but basically when the lineup that they had set before they went on to start recording their studio albums included Steve Rothery on guitar, Mark Kelly on keyboards, Mark Truavas, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but he's on bass, Mick Pointer on drums, and the lead vocalist who goes by the name of Fish.
Yeah.
F-I-S-H. Just Fish, yes.
Not his real name, though.
Not his real name, correct. So they recorded some demos in the spring and summer of 1980 and subsequently were signed to EMI Records, released their first single, Market Square Heroes, in 1982, and their first full album was released in 1983. The name of that album is called Script for a Jester's Tear. And this album was met with some success. It peaked at number 7 on the UK charts. They started, even though it was did pretty well, they started getting accusations that they were being essentially copycats of Genesis.
God damn it! They took my. That was my line.
It's a pretty easy
end of segment.
Yeah, exactly. So they go on tour in support of their debut album, but then the drummer was Pointer, who was the guy that actually started the band, was fired. As lead singer Fish felt that his timing was awful and that he failed to develop as a musician with the rest of the band. And so he gets replaced by Ian Mosley. And basically the core of the band, with the exception of Fish, is the band that they are today. That they've kind of, most of them have stuck with it and throughout their current existence. They had a second album called Fugazi, not like the band at all. It was released in 1984 and had a more streamlined hard rock sound to it. It also sold well, hitting number 5 on the UK charts. And that brings us to Misplaced Childhood, which is their third studio album. And it's a concept album, surprise, surprise, loosely based on the childhood of the lead singer Fish. And he was inspired to write the lyrics of this record after an incident that occurred while he was under the influence of a 10-hour LSD trip. And the story has thematic elements of lust, love, sudden success, acceptance, and lost childhood, along with what is described as an upbeat ending. I tried to find like a specific storyline somewhere. I couldn't find it. So it's just a concept about a variety
Misplaced
of things.
Childhood?
Yeah, I mean,
it's probably the right. I didn't catch it quite.
But I'm talking about like characters and like, was there like, kind of, we've had other descriptions of the actual story. So, but this did go on to be their biggest selling album, topping the UK charts, and remained on the UK charts for 41 weeks. It was the 20th best-selling album in Britain in 1985, and it sold well across the Europe and the US as well. I have a couple of final thoughts on the band, but there's not really a ton of information on them. It's just this is kind of their biggest album. So I am curious to know where we start. Josh, why don't we go ahead and start with you on this?
Sure. So I was it's hard not to make the Genesis comparison. I mean, yeah. I heard that right away. Not even specifically Genesis, more just like Phil Collins. He almost sounds exactly like Phil Collins. Like if you didn't know any better, you would think this might be a Phil Collins Genesis album or something. I don't know when prog ended so that neo-prog could start, but if this is, I think the biggest takeaway I took from this,
I think it might be like New Coke, Josh, where like Coke didn't go away and they just made a new Coke too.
I believe it says it started in the UK in the early 1980s is when it started. So I don't know if Prague was totally gone away by then or whatever, but yeah, it's definitely a new incarnation of it.
So there's this being an 80s album, I think this neo-prog has an incorporation of synths that we haven't heard before in prog rock, and the other big thing was like the electric guitar. I feel like came in strong on this, almost like at times it reminded me of like Top Gun soundtrack, Harold Faltermeyer type of synth and guitar, especially on a song like Heart of Lothian.
Bittersweet, I would say, had that vibe to it too.
Yeah, there's
Sweet, SUITE, for those wondering.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like other prog albums that we've heard, the songs kind of flow into one another. So if you're not paying attention, you'll be on another song without realizing it. Other elements of prog that I heard were, it's kind of, it seemed like a very British album to me. I think there's like folk elements in it. I think it kind of has that medieval feel to it too at times. I definitely got those themes that Matt mentioned, especially love and kind of lost love and lust and things like that. I thought their singles were pretty catchy. Like Pseudo Silk Kimono is kind of like an intro really to the whole album, and it's pretty synthy. And Kaylee and Lavender are pretty strong, catchy songs that I liked. The keys, especially in Kaylee, are pretty good. A song like Heart of Lothian, I kept laughing every time he kept saying white boys. I thought that was hilarious. And in Waterhole, I like the kind of use of xylophone that they have in that. That was cool. That coupled with the electric guitar worked pretty well. Like a lot of not necessarily like a lot of prog bands, this is a pretty short album overall. They don't really they have kind of multi-part songs like in the Bittersweet, which is the fourth track. It kind of has multiple things, and I did hear throughout sonic cues to previous songs. I picked that up. So I think it does reward re-listening in that aspect and kind of ties the album together. We heard that in Genesis as well and some other prog. So, like Matt said, when I saw the neo-prog label on Wikipedia, I was kind of expecting the worst, but I think with the electric guitar kind of worked pretty well for me, and I kind of liked the 80s quality of it. And it was enjoyable. I couldn't say that I would revisit the album, but I thought they were definitely doing, it's like 80s prog. I guess they are like the 80s prog band if you had to like label them something. And this was a band I had never heard of also. Like I think John mentioned that at one point last week, but it's kind of, it moves, it is upbeat for the most part, and I think there's a lot that you can kind of grab onto and enjoy, especially if you like prog. You should definitely check this album out. So I'd say thumbs in the middle to thumbs up on this one for me.
Yeah, I would say neo-prog is not my lane, I would say, historically.
Yeah. That is not a surprise to me.
I wouldn't say I'm anti-prog, but there are bands that do prog that I gravitate to more than other bands, if that makes sense. Like I gravitate more to King Crimson or Rush more than I do big, bold prog. Like this prog felt like 70s excessive Genesis prog mixed with like the Never-Ending Story soundtrack, I'd say, would be how I would describe the sound of like this neo-prog. Like it's like if you take 70s Genesis and you're like, what would happen if you mixed it with, the Never-Ending Story soundtrack? That's what I feel like neo-prog is like. And I can definitely see how this probably influenced later, like the sort of the metal prog, I the Dream Theater-y type stuff, right? Because there's you know what I'm saying? Like I can see how it gets there eventually.
Or even
right?
like
It's
Coheed and Cambria, aren't they kind of like proggy and like
I mean, they're not exactly like this though, because they put a little bit more edge in it. I there isn't a band that I am aware of that, and I know there are ones, but that I can exactly say, oh, they continue the lineage of this, but I can see bits and pieces. But obviously, yeah, Genesis, yes. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, right? Like those are bands that like I think of, and we haven't covered Emerson, Lake and Palmer, but elements of Pink Floyd, I would say. Jethro Tull. Yeah, I'm just going through like the different that like clearly they had to have been influences, right, for this band, and I think Matt pretty much confirmed that. I struggled, like the sonic palette of this. There's nothing of this sound that really hooks me. I get like the guitars aren't biting enough, I would say. They're soaring, and there's pieces of songs that I can kind of try to ride the vibe on a little bit, like Bittersweet, which we mentioned before, Lords of the Backstage, Childhood's End. But I never, so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not an easy genre for me to click. It's like when Matt talks about, like, I know famously like ska, right? That it's a sound that doesn't appeal to him and stuff. I wouldn't say it's not so much that the sound doesn't appeal to me. It's just a difficult sound for me. I think another thing I struggle with in prog is the lyrical soup. It's really not saying anything to me. It's kind of like there's a lot of words, but I'm not quite going for what they're going for. Like the last song in particular, like when you get like When I Hit the Streets back in 81, found a heart in the gutter and a poet's crown. I felt barbed wire kisses and icicle tears. Where have I been for all these years? I'm like, okay, like
that doesn't make it.
I'm not sure what. And then it just kind of continues with like groups of four like that, and I'm like, it always feels like it should have some sort of story to it, some of these prog albums, and then I search for it, and it's like, well, I don't know if these are about lyrics. They're about soundscapes. And when I'm not getting a sound that I grab, like it's not atmospheric enough for me to kind of get lost in the sauce, so to speak. It's not heavy enough for me to really embrace the riffs. It's not like it's expansive, but not in a way that like clicks with me, I think. And I think that's kind of like, so this falls in the, like, it's not necessarily for me. By the second or third, I gave this 3 listens because I wanted to kind of see what I could do, because I could appreciate that the playing was solid. You know, I just I kept looking for the hook that got me in, and I kind of finally said, I know Matt's gonna like this, and I know Josh will probably like it more than I think, but this is the rare album where I think I probably will defer to you guys, because I have to talk about this technically, kind of like what the sound of the guitars are like, and the structure of the songs, because from a aesthetic value, it is just not my lane. And I hate to write albums like that, because part of what I want to do on this show is expand my palette, but this one I almost feel like I need someone to explain to me what they like about it so I could listen to it again. And I promised myself that once Matt tells me what he likes about this album, I'm going to go back and listen to the album in that context. So, Matt, I just set the table for you.
Well, pressure's on. So I mean, full disclosure, I've only known this band in name. My brother did recently get into them. I don't know, maybe a year or two ago. And I remember him talking about it, and he was like, "Oh," and then I realized we were gonna cover it. So I didn't want to listen to it. I wanted to save it for for this week. So I've been holding out a while. First things first, as soon as he started singing, I was like, holy crap. I mean, Josh, you mentioned Phil Collins, but it's like, to me, it's like, it's Phil Collins, and it's very much Peter Gabriel.
Oh, it's Peter Gabriel is what I heard.
I heard more Peter Gabriel. Like Phil Collins actually I always felt like he got his vocal stylings from Gabriel after, those first few years,
sense, yeah.
But it is very much a combination. You hear at both of those for sure. And I was getting, certainly in something like Lords of the Backstage, I mean, that just seems like that could have come off of Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Kind of that soaring kind of, like, it's very dramatic. It's very over the top. As soon as the first
cinematic,
songs,
would you say?
Yes, cinematic, theatrical, and Pseudo Silk Kimono is the name of the first song. And like as soon as it comes on, it's like this got the very 80s synth with it, and then he's got this very dramatic falsetto voice talking about like God knows what. And I was just like, man, this is totally why being a non-lyrics guy is helpful for me on an album like this, because it's ridiculous, know. And so that's why I don't need the lyrics for this, and it's a good thing, because it's like it is kind of nonsensical as far as I'm concerned.
Prague is really like the theater kids of music, isn't it? It's like very performative.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
performative and theatrical.
If they used a lot of drugs, I think is the other thing that they had in there.
10-hour acid trips. Yeah.
I will read the first 4 lyrics, Matt, so you get an idea of what you weren't listening to. So, I probably should say it. Huddled in the safety of to get the idea of what it sounds like, but huddled in the safety of a pseudo silk kimono, wearing bracelets of smoke, naked of understanding, nicotine smears, long dried tears, invisible tears, safe in my own words, learning from my own words, cruel joke.
Wow.
There you go.
Next question. And then I could just get past that and just get into the music, which I loved. I mean, this is like, what do I like about it? Well, first of all, the production. Compared to Genesis, if we're going to keep going off of that note, which you kind of have to, it's kind of hard not to talk about them when you're talking about this. But it's way more produced. I mean, some of the early Genesis recordings, like even now after they remaster them, they're still very archaic in some ways. It's just not, they just didn't have the technology. This is just lush production. It
also has 80s guitar on this, really. It's like, it might as well be like,
very crisp,
great white, or white's, something like,
and it's very big, and it's a very crisp, clear, big kind of production. So it's much cleaner in that regard. It's interesting, because I thought that plenty of the songs in here I did not really find to be proggy necessarily, because and I guess that my definition of prog has more to do with long songs, first of all, lots of time signatures, really interesting different time signatures that switch often. songs that go in totally different directions, stuff like that. So and this definitely had that, but it also had very kind of more straightforward, 3-4 minute pop songs.
Yeah, they have more traditional structure, I think.
Right, and so in that way, I actually kind of feel that this is if somebody like kind of an intro prog album, you could probably. You wouldn't do much better than something like this, right? Like to me, this is an easy entryway into it. And I definitely heard elements of Rush in here as well, that 80s Rush sound.
Yep.
But I just think that it's got really cool melodic parts throughout all of it. I mean, John, if you're saying like I was having a hard time finding a hook, and I don't think you meant the hook of the song itself, but just like something to hook
like
you
a hook,
in.
like hook me in. No,
Right.
there were hooks, like there were choruses all over this album.
Right, and so that's what draws me in. It's really kind of, and I did like it the more I listened to it way more than 3 times, but the more I listened to it, I found myself singing along and just liking the way that the music was progressing and the way that this.
Oh wait, you sang along? Like, what did you sing along to?
With the heart of Lothian.
Okay, so yeah, okay,
it's
gotcha.
just like little parts of it and stuff like that. Like the hook of the song.
You know what's so weird about this album too? Like, I got a vaguely religious feel to this album at times, like a cathedral type sound with different stuff. But then the lyrics are 100% like New Age, like healing crystals type stuff. And prog always has like a weird like medieval element to it for me as well. Like I just hear it like as like medieval sounds kind of. Yeah. So. I like that's a hallmark to me of prog music, even when other groups are doing it and they're talking about vague like I think there's a lot of like armchair philosophy kind of that's also in prog lyrics, self-exploration, shall we say.
And this is also about a lot about relationships. Like Haley's all about I just read that it was about a bunch of relationships that Fish had that he put all together kind of into one person, and just and how they how he did her wrong and did all these women wrong and stuff like that. So it's relationship based and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it has that kind of, I mean, it's got the organ kind of thing that's almost like a church sound in and of itself. But I liked how they brought things back, like Lavender, kind of the melodies, parts of Lavender, parts of Heart of Lothian kind of came and went in different songs. And I don't know if you guys noticed, I think it was at the end of the last part of Bittersweet where they recalled Love Reign Over Me from The Who.
Yeah, by The Who. I noticed that.
I heard that.
Yep. So there was a call back there to that. So, but this was just, I don't know, this to me, somebody that's been into Genesis for many years and likes prog rock, this was a pretty easy listen. This is something that wasn't challenging for me at all. And it was kind of a welcome kind of, sound that was happening in 1985, which is not something that I traditionally associate prog music. Prog's usually more of a 70s kind of a thing. Yeah. But I am aware, and that's the other thing, that my brother went down a freaking rabbit hole with all this, like the Spotify, like if you like this, try this, and then it's like one of those things where you can just, and there are a ton of even bands like in recent years that are very much prog influenced. It's like this whole underground kind of thing. And
there's genres like video game music and stuff that exist now that are cousins of this type of music.
Yeah, I could see that. So, I mean, I liked it. I thought, like I said, it was catchy. There were some interesting, like I really did like the Lords of the Backstage. I liked that had kind of one of the more interesting kind of drum parts that was kind of a little bit of the offbeat thing going on. But yeah, songs like the last 2 songs, like Childhood's End and White Feather, seemed to me to be very kind of like straight up pop songs that were just very catchy and enjoyable. Yeah. So it's kind of ridiculous. And I could, like, Sherry hated it. She's like, I hate everything about this. I was like, okay.
It is not. I probably fall more on the Sherry lane of this, where I'm like, this is not a Sonic palette.
Yeah, which I get.
Me.
It's everybody's thing. I mean, you got it. To me, I think you got to get past the lyrics, at least for. I just don't.
Kelly is basically Brown Eyed Girl lyrically, but like a prog Brown Eyed. He even like at times mentions like making love on the grass, and so I'm like, Jesus, this is Brown Eyed Girl, but like for prog kids, I guess, which is so much less. Like the Van Morrison one is sort of like a idealistic, love affair. This is sort of like, to me, like, are we actually touching, or are we thinking about touching while actually, doing something else, and so I just was chuckling because I was like listening to it. I'm like, Jesus, this is Brown Eyed Girl.
Well, and
like,
Kaylee was
weird.
the big single from this. That was there was 3 singles and they all did pretty well. But Kaylee, and that's kind of known as their best known song. Lavender was a single, and Heart of Lothian was a single as well. And both sides of this record, the first side ends with Heart of Lothian, and the second one begins with Waterhole. Like both the first side and the second side are just continuous pieces of music. The only real stop in the action is between the 5th song and the 6th song when you flip the record over. So, so yeah, I mean, this is up my alley. It's really cool. I would certainly be interested to hear more of their stuff. They do have 20 albums. Yeah, so they're still around. They just had an album out last year, I think.
Do they all play on a continuous loop, or are they autonomous pieces?
Just
of
what
music?
goes right to the next. Well,
Okay.
there's a couple of actually interesting things, but before I get to the postscript there, so I thought this description from Wikipedia about the neo-progressive rock or neo-prog was like just perfect. It says it's characterized by deeply emotional content, often delivered via dramatic lyrics, a generous use of imagery and theatricality on stage. The music is mostly the product of careful composition, relying less heavily on improvised jamming. The subgenre relies very much on clean, melodic, and emotional electric guitar solos combined with keyboards. The main musical influence on the neo-prog genre are bands from the first wave of progressive rock, such as early Genesis, and to a lesser extent, Pink Floyd. Funk, hard rock, and punk rock were also influences on the genre, which is the one part that I was
Punk
kind of
rock?
like, really?
I did not
yeah.
hear the punk rock.
That's-
I did not hear any funk either.
I didn't hear any of that either. But the beginning parts about the sheen and all that, I was like, yep, that's pretty much this.
Can I also share something here, because I did not check until afterwards? I was curious, like, who is in this genre. So I went to All Music. There's not a single band I recognize who is followed by. I do want to share some of these names though, because it gives you a little bit. Enchant, Frog with 2 G's Cafe, Landmark with a Q, Spock's Beard, Mostly Autumn, Iluvatar, Flamborough Head, and Sylvan.
These aren't real
bands
names.
that are I mean, you can do a lot worse than just saying those bands, and I feel like that description you gave was great, Matt, but also I think those names also give you a little bit of a vibe for like what you're listening to here as well. So if you listen to that and you're like, ooh, those bands sound like they'd be pretty rad, I think you're in.
You're in Progland.
So yeah, I'm gonna give this a full-blown thumbs up for me. Surprise, surprise. And it sounds like, John, are you abstaining from a vote here? Is that what was that?
No,
what I
I'm
heard?
giving this a thumbs down.
Thumbs down.
Like
Okay, got it. Okay, got it. And Josh, you were slight thumbs up.
Yeah.
Or thumbs in the middle. Okay.
Yep.
So just quick post. This is the only time we're covering Marillion. The lead singer Fish actually left the band in 1987 to pursue a solo career. I read that he actually was really upset with the manager, thought that that the band was getting fleeced, and he basically gave the rest of the band an ultimatum saying if either he goes or I go, and the band stayed with the manager. So he went.
Did you know Fish's real name is Derek Dick? Perhaps that's why he went by Fish. So just thought I'd share that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So Fish leaves the band in '87, and he was then replaced by Steve Hogarth, who is now the current lead singer. And the rest of the band has been basically that incarnation since. They released 17 other albums since Misplaced Childhood. And in later years, they actually started this tradition of allowing fans to pre-order their albums, because I think they left their label and they didn't really have a label. So they had fans pre-order their album, and they used that money to create the album, and then they would give out special copies to the fans that pre-ordered it. So they would do this in I think they started this in the late 80s. And so they're also kind of pioneers in the whole crowdsourced, fan-funded albums that I guess a lot of other bands might be doing. So then they do that quite. They did that quite regularly.
I would imagine they have a rabid following. They strike
Yes.
me as the type of band that has like a super cool. Okay, gotcha.
Well, I looked to see if there was a documentary on them, and there is, but they actually have their own website, which is that you have to pay like a monthly subscription to join, and that's where they have a
What
variety
do you get
of
for
videos.
that?
And
Do you get like their musings like on a weekly
you get
basis?
you get the document.
stories?
You get the documentary. I didn't go all into it because I'm not spending money on the thing, but it's a
research.
whole.
Your brother? You should tell your brother to do it so he could
Probably.
get dispatches from Marillion's website.
The website is The Space, marillionvod.uscreen.io. It's called The Space, and it's basically like a variety of videos and interviews. And so there was a documentary on there, and they did talk about fans, like it's like this cult of fans that like are all super, super into them, that feel like they have this secret that nobody else knows about, but it's like this special thing. And these people travel hundreds and hundreds of miles to see them multiple times.
Oh
and
my
like,
God.
it's like a whole thing. Yeah, for sure. So, in describing it, one of the things that they were saying that they didn't like is despite the fact that they do get, generally speaking, pretty good positive reviews, nobody ever seems to take them seriously or like want to interview them or anything like that, because they kind of have this label of being this nerdy prog rock band.
I would imagine critics hate this band, would be my guess. Am I
It's
right,
that-
or
they-
did they get...
No,
okay.
that it's like a weird juxtaposition, because they actually
Okay.
the reviews are pretty decent.
Okay.
But like nobody wants to go beyond that and actually either admit that they like them or like invite them on radio stations for interviews and stuff like that.
That's kind of sad, actually.
Yeah, they have, because they have this reputation, but and they won't get played on the radio. So like it's this weird thing. The Hogarth, the new lead singer, basically said, he thinks that they should have changed their name when he joined, because they do. He said that they've done a variety of different sounds. It's not just this. He actually at one point said, if Pink Floyd and Radiohead had a love child that was in touch with their feminine side, that would be us. Was his way of describing just Marillion in general.
So have you listened to any of the later stuff?
I haven't. No, I listened to the previous record, because of the first album, because that was the second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and it sounds cool. So I could totally see myself going down a wormhole with this. It's just trying to get more into it, but it's. But yeah, they've got 20 fans. They're 20 albums. Their fans are super devoted. Yeah, they probably have 20
they're really
devoted
devoted to their
fans.
20
Yeah.
fans, yeah.
And they're still kicking. They're still kicking around. So,
Interesting.
yep.
The lineage of the timeline of prog rock is interesting, but yeah, I mean my final thought is I think what kind of carried me through this album was the electric guitar and kind of that throughout. So
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty easy guitar sound to get into. But.
Yeah.
Well, and in fairness, I don't really love that 80s produced, which we'll talk about later in this episode, but the 80s production is a hard thing for me as well. So when you throw that on top of that type of prog, I think that was something that made it, compared to like when we did, Yes and Genesis and stuff, albums that I would joke and say not my lane, but there were always stuff that I could pull that I liked on those albums. I think the 80s production is what kind of moved that into the not for me. So I'd be willing to listen to them if they made stuff outside of that 80s production feel, because I get the feeling I might like them a little bit more. But
Okay.
I think that was kind of what doomed the album for me. The 80s feel and production, and just it's that sound sort of sterilizes music for me a little bit, and I think that's what happened here.
Well,
yeah.
maybe you should check out 2004's Marbles, which is their 5th highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Maybe they've lost that by then, so maybe that's the way to go. Maybe that'll be the next one I listen to, and I can report.
I
back on it.
actually will check that out, Matt, just so I can report back on that in our
Okay.
next full episode.